We found this photo of a 14-year-old telegraph worker from 1910 in Nashville, Tennessee. His name is George Christopher.
Working on his story took us from an abandoned cemetery deep in the hills to one of the largest cemeteries in Nashville. We're going to tell you about George and take you to the very spot where his picture was taken.
And then I'm going to show you how I was able to find him amongst thousands of graves at Woodlawn Cemetery. So stick around. This video is sponsored by PIA VPN. I've been a genealogist now for several years, and I like to find pictures of people from way back when and try to tell their story one more time. At this point, I've actually done a couple of videos about child workers in the U.S. from the early 1900s, and these photos have come from the Lewis Hines collection at the Library of Congress website. He was a sociologist and activist in the early part of the 20th century in the U.S. who worked hard to expose the dangers and tragedies of child labor. His work helped shape and reform child labor laws, and I've been mesmerized by this collection on the Library of Congress website. Now, Lewis Hine worked all up and down the East Coast and middle of America while he was doing his tours. And in this case, this is what he had to say about this little fella.
George Christopher, Postal Telegraph number 7, 14 years old. Been at it over 3 years. Does not work nights. Telegraph boys were typically 10 to 18 years old and would quickly deliver telegrams through cities on bicycles. The job was pretty dangerous. A lot of the time they were on strict schedules and would break traffic rules to make deadlines and try not to get hit by trolleys and the up-and-coming automobiles. The job was soon replaced by the telephone. By the end of World War II, about 45% of U.S. homes had a phone. But in 1910, George Christopher hand-delivered important messages across downtown Nashville. If you haven't visited, the streets aren't completely flat. Riding around on a bike without gears would not have been super easy.
And if you like this video so far, be sure to give it a like and subscribe because every little bit helps. George was born in Rutherford County, Tennessee, to James Madison Christopher and Louisa Catherine Allen in 1896. His father died only 10 years later in 1906. And his mom had to move the family down to Nashville to make ends meet. George almost immediately went to work. On the 1910 census, he is listed as living with his mother and siblings. His mom's occupation is rooming house, which basically means she was a landlord assistant, kind of in charge of making sure all of the rooms are taken care of in a bigger house where a lot of different tenants lived. George's brother Mitchell was a newsboy. His cousin Andrew worked in a candy store, and his other brother, Annual, worked as I don't know. I can't really make that out. Maybe you can. So 1910 is about when this picture was taken. So what happened next? Here's a question for you. What is a VPN? If you don't already know, you're about to learn. And if you do already know, then stick around for this exclusive offer. It stands for Virtual Private Network, and it's the best way to keep your internet browsing activity private, because your internet provider is fully capable of seeing everything that you see, even in incognito mode. That's where PIA VPN comes in. PIA stands for Private Internet Access. With over 30 million downloads, it's easy to see why. They make it super simple to hide your IP address and encrypt your connection. This way, it shields your digital activity from your internet service provider, government censors, and network administrators. I wouldn't say I use the internet that warrants super powerful discretion, but I also don't like the idea of my internet service provider or anyone with a little bit of computer knowledge being able to see anything that I look at. Call me old-fashioned, but I prefer my business to be mine. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. It comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer service support. You can visit our special link piavpn.com/forgottenlines, or you can click it in the description down below, or scan this QR code to get 83% off with 4 months free. That comes out to only $2.03 per month. Now let's get back to it.
In 1917, he registered for the draft during the First World War. His occupation is now telegraph operator for Western Union. And on the line where it asks if you have anyone immediately related to you who rely on you for support, he lists mother and wife. This gives him an exemption from the draft, which was dependents. 3 years later, in 1920, he is living with wife Catherine, daughter Thelma, and mom Louisa. He's the only one listed as employed, still as a telegraph operator. In 1930, Louisa Catherine is gone from George's house. He now has 2 new kids, Dorothy and George Jr. His mom has moved in with his brother Thomas, who is now a mechanic for the Stockwell Motor Car Company, until they shut down during the Great Depression in 1931.
So what is George up to in 1940? Well, he's still a telegraph operator, which is a little surprising because telephones in the city were starting to really take over the telegraph industry. But it turns out that they were still pretty important for specific businesses like railways and shipping ports. Now here's an interesting little document, and this can be a little confusing at first glance because here's a birth certificate in 1942 for someone we know was born in the late 1800s. So what are we looking at exactly? Well, this is George's delayed birth certificate. These are cool because it's a little reminder that before 1933, birth certificates were not a widely used system yet. You had some states, counties, and cities with their own birth certificate systems, but it wasn't widespread until around 1933 to 1934. So if you're looking for a birth certificate for your grand, great, or great-great-grandparent, it might not exist yet. So back then, for people who were born before the birth certificate system kicked in, they had to apply for a delayed birth certificate later on. This was particularly important if they wanted to get on any social programs, like Social Security, or even apply for a federal ID. But people generally had to provide evidence or witnesses that could testify to their birth situation. And luckily for George, his mom was still around.
She was there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, she remembered it.
She remembers.
She remembered it quite well. Probably in the family house out in rural Rutherford, because that's where she listed. She listed rural Rutherford as where he was born, not even a town or a city or anything, just rural, which means it was out in the middle of nowhere. And she testified directly that he was born on January 24th, 1896. These are great info if you're working on your own family, because they can sometimes have extra details that will help you out, such as the person's address, their parents' names, and mother's maiden name, which is crucial. And sometimes even the witness can be important, because witnesses will sometimes say how they're related to the person, and that can help narrow it down and make sure you're looking at the right person. But George was cutting it close for his best witness. This was drafted on June 24th, 1942, and his mom, Louisa, passed away a few months later on October 28th, 1942, at 82 years old. Now, if you're not familiar with my videos or genealogy in general, you might not have heard of Find a Grave, but it is a website that works kind of like a Facebook for dead people, where volunteers will create profiles for cemeteries and graves so that people from wherever can look at their family or relatives or random people to get information about them. They can see their headstones, birth dates, death dates, all the things that can go along with it. And some of these volunteers will create full-blown memorials for folks and have extra things that they found about them, like newspaper articles and pictures and obituaries and whatever else. But sometimes there's nothing, like George's mom, Louise. She's not there. So we thought this would be a great opportunity to show how to go find somebody and add them to Find a Grave. We thought it would be so easy. But this day and age, Find a Grave is so thorough that if you come across somebody who's not on there, it's usually for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Death certificates typically list the burial site down at the bottom, but Louisa's is pretty vague. It just says burial ground at Triune. Triune is a rural, I can't say that word. Triune is a rural area near Rutherford where their family was from and a little south of Nashville. She never remarried after her husband James died in 1906. Maybe she was buried with him. He is on Find a Grave in Christopher Cemetery, which happens to be near Triune. We had to flesh out their family tree to find clues, and on Mary Council, James's sister's death certificate, it says she's buried at the old Christopher burial ground. This seemed like a good place to start.
When we pulled up, it looked like we might have been the first visitors in years. The deer had made it pretty comfortable for themselves. We looked all around, but I don't think it had been mowed in a few years, and there were several spots that were sunken without stones. But we did find a couple in the dirt. So what we were looking for is in a lot of these older cemeteries and older plots, the ground will dip, and that's from somebody's box or pine box or whatever they were buried in, decaying over time and collapsing, and then the ground sinking down with it. So if you find something like that, then typically at one end or the other, you might find a stone buried under the topsoil, maybe an inch or two from leaves and dirt and things decaying over 70 years.
So when we were there and we found one stone that had been sunken in and kind of falling over like this, I kneeled down to try to read it because it was facing the ground. So I was trying to read it, and my knee hit something that was in the grass right next to it. And I started digging and found another stone that was buried under some grass and dirt. And that stone belonged to a Mrs. M.T. Christopher, who died in 1906.
Yeah, you would think that would be enough info to figure out who she was, but I couldn't really find who she was. I got all of George's siblings and all of his dad's siblings and went down their lines and stuff, and I couldn't really find anything that matched an M.T. Christopher, and that's about as far as we got with her. But I'm pretty sure that his mom is buried somewhere out there, and just walking around for a few minutes, we tripped over a couple of stones that were hidden under like tons of grass.
Years of growth.
Yeah, logs and dirt and whatever else is out there, and deer poop, tons of that out there. And I'm
a lot of frost on this day in particular.
Yeah, it was chilly. So I think that you would need to take a GPR out there or ground penetrating radar to try to find exactly where each plot is. But I don't have 18 grand laying around to buy myself one of those. So maybe that's a project for another day. But I'm pretty sure she's out there with the rest of her family. And that's about as good as we can do for her. Mm-hmm. But we can still add her to Find a Grave, even without a picture of her. You can use a picture of anything you have. You can even use her death certificate. So what about George? Where's he? He's not on Find a Grave either. But his death certificate says that he's buried at Woodlawn, which is in Nashville, Tennessee, and is actually where several major country stars are buried, like George Jones and Tammy Wynette. And they're not famous, but a lot of my own family is buried there. So I'm actually pretty familiar with how Woodlawn works. Since they're so big, a lot of cemeteries and funeral homes are like this that are a little larger. They have systems that work for you. All you have to do is call and tell them that you're looking for somebody, and they're generally pretty happy to help you. And they make it pretty easy. They give you a map to their location and everything. So I thought finding George was going to be easy, but it wasn't. So off we go to Woodlawn Cemetery in Nashville, with the hopes of finding Mr. George Christopher buried amongst 60,000 other people. Now, the best way to do this in a cemetery this big is to just go into the office and ask. And the folks at Woodlawn I've worked with several times in the past, and I've only ever had great experiences. And this time I met Mr. Randy at the front desk. He took me to another office where I sat down and waited for Michelle. Michelle brought me everything they had on George, which was this card. And all it shows is his plot number and burial purchase, and she was able to give me a map of the whole place. And we're looking for the Highland section across the street. This is a 150-acre cemetery, so it's important to have everything on a map like that. So with map in hand, we start driving. Now this is the bell tower. I think this is just really cool. It's a destination for folks who come to the cemetery. They like to check it out and take pictures. And here we are at Highland. So he's buried somewhere out here. And according to the map, he's not too far away. Now what's nice about Woodlawn is that most of the plaques have actual numbers that correspond to their map. So this is 23C Grave 1. So that 23 is going to correspond to the map where there's a 23. Right here. And he's up and over. So that means he's buried somewhere over there. Well, let's go look. Walking a little bit more, double checking our bearings. This is 22, which is right here. He's still up and over. We're on the right track. Here is 77. We're almost there. Remember, we're looking for 74. So he is just a few plots over. 77 to 74. Somewhere, hopefully, around over here. But this was about the time we started to realize that he's not there. We looked all around this entire area for about 20 or 30 minutes. We found everything marked 74, and none of them were George. We found a vacant area just here. So he is most likely buried in this area without a marker. Or if there is a marker, it's buried underneath the topsoil. Like his mom, George didn't have a marker. And this might seem like a huge disappointment, and it is a bit of a letdown, but it is also one of the top reasons why we started this channel in the first place.
People buried under a patch of grass, one in an abandoned cemetery and one among thousands of people, completely forgotten.
Let's add him to Find a Grave and be sure to include his coordinates. So let's add George to Find a Grave. I'm going to show you how I'm going to do it. I'm not a Find a Grave expert, but it's not that complicated. So I've got the website pulled up, and first things first, we want to make sure there's not already a George Christopher listed at Woodlawn. We already know he's not, but just to be safe. So I've got his name plugged in, his location of Nashville, click search, no matches found. So let's add him in there. Add a memorial. So we have to choose where he's buried. And we know he's buried at Woodlawn, which is in Nashville. And we know he's at Woodlawn Memorial Park and Mausoleum. Let's click next. That's the right one. And now we put in everything we know about him. We know his first, middle names, and last name. Don't know of any nickname that he had. And his birth was January 24th of 1896 in Rutherford, Tennessee. Rutherford County, Tennessee. And he died, let me double check my notes, January 16th of 1950. There we go. And he died in Nashville. Okay, and this it gives us some options for extra info. And we know that he was in plot 74A, grave number 2. So we'll put that in there. And we'll make a note of gravesite details of no marker visible. And we can come back and add a bio later, since this will be our memorial and this is transferable over to somebody else. Like if a family member comes along and says, hey, George was my great granddad, can I have control of his memorial? And I will say, absolutely, here you go. Okay, so we've successfully added his memorial. Let's give him a few pictures since we have those. We actually have pictures of what he looks like. We're going to put his obituary, the actual picture of him from the Library of Congress, And we can put his plot card and a picture of his actual site. So that's 4 photos. We'll throw those up there. Now anyone coming along who happens across this page will be able to see him. And there we go. He's added. I can go back and add a little bit more information to him when I have a chance, but I'll put a link down below for both him and his mom. I'm going to go ahead and do Louisa, saw her name like a whole bunch of different ways. I'll put a link down below in the description, so if you want to go check them out for yourself, you'll be able to.
George Christopher was a boy who, like many others, had to go to work when his father died and there were mouths to feed. He continued working and earning to provide for his family during 2 world wars and the Great Depression. Billions of regular people have lived and died without a marker. And now George is one whose story is told one more time.